let's start this webinar session. So the tragical events taking place in Ukraine over the past 3 weeks totally shook the macroeconomic environment and the energy landscape, especially in Europe, where the dependency on Russian commodities is particularly acute. So today, our experts will share the key elements to focus on in the coming weeks, from monetary tightening plans to European gas stock levels or French nuclear availability. So today, Olivier Gasnier will start the session with a focus on macroeconomic and the oil market. Will be followed by Évariste Nouki, who will take care about natural gas issues, and Etienne Covin will conclude the session with a focus on power and EUA markets. And let me remind you that this is an interactive session, so don't hesitate to use the chat module to ask questions to our speakers. We'll do a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And you will also be asked to fill a 30-second satisfaction survey at the end of the session. And note that the slides and a replay of the session will be available by tomorrow at the latest on the Energiscan platform. So it's time to start the presentation with Olivier Gasnier. Olivier, the floor is yours now.
Good morning, everyone. So beyond the geopolitical and geostrategic stakes of the war in Ukraine, it's important to start by recording why this war will have major economic consequences. The weight of Russia and Ukraine in trade with the major countries is quite small, a little higher for Europe, but it does not exceed 2% of imports and 3% of exports, or on 3% of imports of those countries. Similarly, the financial commitments of the major Western banks are limited and do not present a systemic risk, as you can see on both tables of this slide. It's of course the importance of Russia and Ukraine in the trade of hydrocarbons, metals, and agricultural raw materials that is a problem. We saw this as soon as the hostilities broke out with the surge in the price of commodities, as you can see on the graphs, and with the EU's decision, initial EU's decision, as you know, that may change very quickly, to protect trade in hydrocarbons from the sanctions imposed on Russia. And just to some figures to illustrate all this, Russia accounts for around 30% of world steel exports, 40% of palladium exports, also a major exporter of nickel. So all this very important for the automotive sector. It has a market share of 20% of fertilizer exports, and between 15 and 25% of wheat, corn, barley, etc. I don't have the slide anymore. I don't know if you can see. Okay. So if you look at the share of Russia and Ukraine for Europe, it's the same thing. I mean, really specifically on raw materials, for example, 50% of coal imports, 40% of gas imports, 25% for oil imports, etc. Very important for aluminium imports or metal roads for constructions, or you have, for example, 90% of sunflower seeds that come from Russia or Ukraine. So we are beginning to see many examples of shortages in industry, especially in the car industry, and especially in Germany, in agriculture, construction. All that leads to higher costs, higher sales prices, longer delivery times, and factory stoppages. Actually, we can say that this war often adds to the damage caused by the pandemic over over the past 2 years, especially in industry. Before we look at how we can assess the economic impact of this war, let's take a closer look at what is happening in the oil market. So Russia is the second oil producer, and as you can see on this diagram, it exports close to 8 million barrels per day. So that was at least the situation at the end of 2021, before the war starts, and 60% of these exports are towards the EU countries, or more generally towards European countries, but most of that is for some EU countries, the dependency to Russian oil is very high, and alternative solutions cannot be quickly found. For example, you can see that 30% of oil imports of Germany come from Russia, and for Russia's neighbors, that is to say, for example, the Baltic countries, this share is very often more than 80%. So of course, the European Union would like to do without Russian oil. But as you know, so far only the US and the UK have imposed an embargo. And in theory, if we refer to the previous diagram, that means that so far 90% of Russian oil exports are spared by the sanctions. But in reality, for logistical, financing, insurance reasons, or simply the fact that potential customers fear future sanctions or some damage to their image, so they do not rush to buy Russian oil. Only a small part could be offset by additional purchases from Asian customers, and we have some evidence that India is doing that, for example. They take advantage of the very low prices of the oil compared to the Brent, and they are buying more crude. But estimates are beginning to converge on a loss of 2 to 3 million barrels of Russian oil supplies on the market. And for the time being, OPEC has refused to accelerate its production increase, and the alternatives are very limited and difficult to achieve quickly. For example, there are still negotiations with Iran about its nuclear program. A deal could pave the way for a lifting of sanctions, and there are estimates that point to a potential comeback of 1 million barrels per day of oil, of Iranian oil on the market in a 6-month time. But so far, the deal hasn't been reached. There are also discussions between the US and Venezuela for a potential lifting of sanctions. There are also hopes that US shale output could increase, but everyone is waiting for that. It's not happening since the start of the year. For political reasons, for financial reasons, the US output has remained completely stable. So according to the International Energy Agency, that has assumed a loss of 3 million barrels of Russian oil on the market, the oil market will still be in deficit in Q3. Despite the slowdown in demand, they have also taken into account. As you can see on this table, we have made a slightly more optimistic forecast, but as we have a rebalancing of the market that would start, you have to look at the stock bills line, the rebalancing. So supply would match demand from Q3, but that is a scenario that remains very far from what everybody had in mind at the start of the year, when everybody was expecting rebalancing to start during Q1, and that explains, of course, the upward pressure on prices. So precisely on prices, as you can see on those charts, we have seen the Brent prices surging higher, they flirted with 2008 highs. The price of the and the Brent first nearby reached $139 per barrel, close to the maximum of 2008 at 147.5. Then we had a fall below $100 per barrel, and then again a rise, and now the price of the Brent is trading above $120 per barrel. So the backwardation of the curve is extremely strong. That suggests that the price that we could see once the crisis ends could be around $85 or $90 per barrel, but that is really very, very uncertain. We don't know exactly how long it will last, on what will be the consequence on the trades of Russian oil, etc. In our view, the rebalancing of the market by increasing supply on destroying demand should begin in the second half of this year, as I show you, but it's clear that the risk of this scenario going off the race are very high, and that in the interval we could see prices going much higher in the short term. So let's try to clarify things on the demand side now, about a word about the macroeconomic situation. Actually, the sharp rise in oil prices, and more generally on commodity prices, brings us back to a situation we have not seen since the 70s. Inflation has reached level we have not seen for 40 years. The big change compared to some months ago, what we thought some months ago, is that inflation should remain extremely high, at least until the end of this year. The world, of course, has changed in 40 years. You cannot compare the situation today with an energy intensity that has been divided by 3 with the situation in the 70s. But in the past, we have never seen such an inflationary surge not followed by a strong economic slowdown or even a recession. Especially at this surge in prices is accompanied by a rationing. And if you look at what happens on markets, you have really this strong flattening of the rate curve in the US that you can see on the left-hand chart. So that means the fact that short-term rates are rising much faster than long-term rates, and that foreshadows a much weaker growth or even a recession if the curve were to invert. That is a very reliable indicator. In terms of economic forecast, we have revised these forecasts downwards sharply at the beginning of the month, as you have probably noticed in our monthly report, and particularly for the Eurozone, which seems overexposed to the crisis. At the start, we thought we had been a little heavy-handed, if I may say, in cutting by 1.5% our forecast for the Eurozone, compared to minus 0.5 only for the US. But if you look now at the process of downward revisions made by everybody, it seems that finally it was really reasonable to do that, and probably that the risks are for larger downward revision. If you take the example of the OECD has not provided downward a new forecast, but they estimate that the crisis will push up global inflation by 2.5% on cost more than a point of growth in 2022. So by comparison, we have lowered our forecast from 4.3 to 3% for global growth, with a deep recession in Russia, of course. But once again, I would insist on the fact that these estimates are subject to considerable uncertainty and may revise again strongly in the coming months. I will conclude by saying a word about inflation and the impact on the monetary policy on the financial market. So as we said, inflation has reached record high level, nearly 8%, nearly 8% in the US, nearly 6% in the Eurozone, more than 6% in the UK, where the Bank of England has already raised interest rates 3 times since December. The Fed has just done so for the first time since 2018, and the ECB has announced the early end of its asset purchase program for this summer. As you can see on the right-hand charts, the outbreak of the war has only had a short-term effect on market expectations. Market now believe that central bank have been really too slow to take the inflation risk seriously. Inflation expectations are really soaring, and even the Fed is no longer forecasting that inflation will be brought back below 2%, that is its target, by 2024. So the market now expect the Fed to add nearly 25 basis point rate hikes by year end, on top of the one that has been decided a few days ago. And the Fed members, they really validate this forecast, and they even now point to increases of 50 basis points, and probably as soon as the next meeting in May. And in addition to higher rates, you have really to take into account the fact that central banks will draw liquidity from the market after years of really pumping liquidity on markets. So that if you take all this change in the environment on markets, higher rates, lower liquidity, on top of a sharp downward revision in growth expectations, it's a very big change for markets, and I would say a very dangerous mix. So if I want to sum up, I would say that I probably will still underestimate the impact of this war on the economy, and probably the risk are really down for growth, and we also probably underestimate the impact of the change in monetary policy on markets, and all this will really can create serious volatility, serious downward adjustment in equity markets in particular.
Okay, so it seems that we have some technical issues with Évariste, so maybe we can switch directly to the power and the EUA section, and we'll move back to the gas part afterwards. So Etienne, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, hello Etienne. So yeah, can you go on with the power and EUA section?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Julien. So hello, everyone. So as most of you must have seen by now, the power and carbon markets were unfortunately not spared either by the conflict in Ukraine and the subsequent crisis. But today I'm still going to present you how exactly these markets reacted to the event and what we could expect in the upcoming weeks. And first, as usual, let's start with the carbon markets. So as you can see on both charts with the blue curves, the emission prices observed a quite noticeable volatility when the Russian military forces entered Ukraine. But in contrast with the power and gas prices that you can see on the right chart in red and green, actually the emission prices observed a strong fall at the beginning of the conflict. So why such fall while the rest of the energy complex was soaring? So basically, the main driver was once again the speculators, which abandoned the carbon market as the invention started. So why such fleeing? Well, basically for two reasons. The first one is that all the investors, investment funds, etc., all the players with non-compliance, without compliance obligations, wanted to avoid having any risk related to the carbon market as long as the outcome and consequences of the conflicts were unknown. So basically, they wanted to have a risk-off approach. And the second reason was they wanted to generate cash to cover for their losses in the other markets, and of course to pay for the soaring margin calls. Because as you can see on the right chart, the power and gas prices really exploded with the beginning of the conflict, which induced surging margin calls, and basically this participant could allow it, sold their EUAs to, find this cash. But this was not the only reason, even though it was the main one. We also saw some Russian companies, both on the compliance side and the speculative one. So for the compliance side, it's basically Russian companies which had stationary installations within the EU. And basically, those Russian companies sold massively their e-waste as well by fear of seeing their access to the European registry and the Occidental market removed. And finally, we had some, let's say, technical and option trading, which also fueled the fall. So basically, short sellers expecting and betting on this fall, and also some option hedging. So, for instance, put sellers hedging by selling their e-waste, and also as prices went down, and also call sellers doing the opposite. So basically, unwinding their hedges. One of the most interesting points that occurred during this crisis was that a negative and strong negative correlation between the e-waste and the fuels and power prices materialized. And you can see it pretty clearly on the right chart. So basically, as power and gas prices went up, the carbon prices went down. But all is not bad because, as you can see on the chart, prices quickly rebounded, and this time for a combination of reasons rather than a main one. So the first reason was that, well, prices went down as low as 55 euros per ton, which is significantly interesting considering that just a few weeks ago, prices were near 100 euros per ton. So many participants saw this level of prices as attractive and took advantage of the situation to build let's say, lengths and anticipate their future obligation, because as you all know, the fundamentals of the market did not change. The ETS cap will continue to decrease. The MSR will continue to withdraw volumes from the scheduled auction. A second point was we saw some easing risk of Russian gas supply disruption. So basically, we saw Germany oppose ban on energy products on Russian energy products, and we also saw the first timid steps in negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. So of course, this calmed down a bit the market, even though yes, the level reached remains very fragile, and the markets remain really nervous. A third point was that the European Commission really disregarded any rumors of an intervention on the EU ETS, because as you all know, each time that energy prices started to surge, which unfortunately occurred several times in the past years, we always saw some heavy emitting countries such as Poland fight for an intervention on the EU ETS, even though it's not the factors behind the surge. But really, the Commission reiterated its intention to pursue the Fit for 55 negotiations, and even recommended the member states to use the revenues from the auctions to help the final consumers face the extreme energy prices. And finally, and this is a very important and interesting point resulting from the crisis, the European Union is looking for independence from the Russian gas supply, and this is actually likely to result in a higher coal-fired power generation. Because you may have missed it, but because in Germany, the government at first was considering extending the lifetime of its nuclear power plants, but finally decided to pursue its nuclear phase-out as planned, and instead to put some recently exited coal power plants or power plants which were about to exit the market in the reserve. So basically, they are planning to use coal-fired generations to compensate for a potential missing gas supply, which of course have another issue, but we will talk about it in the power side. Which leads us to our forecast. So I think there are two main points to, let's say, remember for the carbon market. So the first one and the main one is, of course, that the conflict developments in Antcon will remain the prevailing drivers of prices in the upcoming weeks and months. Basically, the level reached recently, we saw prices over near 80 euros per ton in the past week, is really fragile. The market is really nervous, and any developments in the conflict, would it be one positive or negative, will quickly drive prices one way or the other. So basically expect volatility in the carbon market. A second point is that speculators are likely to remain outside of the market during the crisis. Of course, some of them have returned in the past week, but their position remains very low, and basically this will result in very limited upside potential. So prices have managed to rebound up to 80 euros per ton, but for now we see as quite unlikely that prices will go back to 100 euros per ton as they were early February. Well, at least as long as the conflict perdures. So we considered three cases for this conflict. First, phase one, with a conflict that extends at least early summer. We consider that speculators will quickly return as soon as the outcome and economic fallout of the conflict and the sanction imposed by the West on Russia will become clearer. So for now, they remain out of the market, but once, say, we see some positive sign of development, they could quickly come back and jump into the carbon market and then push back prices back to where they were. We considered limited gas supply disruption and, of course, demand destruction. And finally, we considered an additional support, as I said before, from an increased coal generation due to the European Union looking for independence from the Russian gas supply. But we also have to consider two extreme cases. So the first Belarus one, which considers a worsening of the conflict or an extending conflicts. So basically a Ukraine war that will perdure until at least 2023 or at the end of 2022, which will have drastic consequences on the energy markets. Basically, we expect skyrocketing fuels prices, which at first will, due to the negative correlation with the carbon market, will push carbon prices down as further participants will offload e-waste. And of course, it would lead to heavy demand destruction. So this time we expect also compliance players to sell their stocks because basically they won't need it anymore due to the heavy demand destruction. Last hypothetical case would be an intervention of lawmakers into the ETS, for instance, front-loading e-way volumes to help consumers face the extreme energy prices. But we really see this point as very unlikely for now, and it would be really an extreme cases. On the other hand, a bullish case would be a quick resolution of the crisis, no demand destruction, a quick return of speculative buying interest, so prices could go back up very quickly, and of course, additional support from an increased coal-fired power generation. That's it for the carbon. Let's now move on to the power side. And first, let's take a quick break from the Ukrainian conflict to have a look on the nuclear situation. But unfortunately, I don't have any good news either on this side. So as you can see, the availability in France is quite catastrophic, continue to be well below historical average. So it is induced, as you all know, by the EDF, still looking for a corroded pipe issue in the safety injection system of its, let's say, largest nuclear power plants. But unfortunately, the issue could also concern all the types of nuclear units. And basically, the ISN urged EDF to inspect all these reactors, which is not the case currently. So let's say that in our most optimistic case, the French nuclear availability will remain in the lower range of the historical average. But in the more probable and unfortunately worst case, we could see further extension of maintenance or even new reactors being stopped. On the chart, you should be careful because the blue dotted curve represents the REMIT availability currently displayed, but it does not include the new and updated target of EDF. So as you can see on the chart, EDF recently strongly decreased its nuclear output target for this year and the next one, basically not expecting any nuclear generation above 330 terawatt hours in 2023. And of course, this REMIT availability does not show it on the chart. So do not expect the availability to recover in the summer. It will actually decrease. In Belgium, the main news was recently the government agreed to a 10-year extension of 2 of its nuclear units because all of the nuclear units were planned to exit the market on 2025. But the 2 first ones to exit the market, scheduled at the end of 22 and early 23, are still scheduled to leave the market. So it will not be an easy decision to implement, but it was still worth noticing. Now looking at prices. So as you can see, the Russian military entering Ukraine pushed the energy markets into full crisis mode. And basically the soaring supply concerns in the gas market also drove the power prices way up. So basically it induced strong panic buying, extreme volatility, and due to this volatility, very low liquidity. And finally, of course, soaring margin calls, which make it very hard to maintain positions or even to take directional position. So let's not forget that the gas prices were really the main driver behind the power prices surge. We saw even the French power spot prices hit 540 euros per megawatt hour. Without the Russian gas flow being affected, of course, the gas market was in full panic mode, but basically the Russian gas flow continued, was sustained. So that gives you an idea to where prices could go if we saw a full gas supply disruption. On both terms, so on the short and long term, the French nuclear availability concerns provided additional support, of course. So really, the power market is a victim of from all sides. But as you can see on the chart, prices still corrected quite quickly for the reason I explained already in the carbon market. So positive sentiment emerging from Germany opposing a ban on Russian energy supply, and of course the first talks between Russia and Ukraine. It's a timid talk, which finally leads to our last slide. So there are three main points to remember for the power markets. First one, and it's quite worrying, is that the Russian energy supply risk does not concern gas, but also coal, which means that even if Germany planned to use coal power plants to compensate, to make up for the loss of gas supply, it still needs to find this coal supply, which could be an issue since nearly 50% of the coal supply comes from Russia. So really the power market is exposed to a strong supply risk and could face a strong tension. The crisis and gas market will, of course, similarly to the carbon market, will remain the main driver of power prices. Basically, if you want to know where the power prices will go, you have to look at the gas market and at the conflict, of course. And finally, some additional bullish pressure could come from a worsening French nuclear situation. So basically, the availability is already very bad, but it could be worse, and it could go worse if EDF start to find corroded pipes in its other nuclear units. As for the three scenarios, we are basically the same as for the carbon markets. The only thing is that, of course, it induces opposite variations. So basically, a conflict escalation or an extended conflict will push power prices significantly up. And of course, if you take into account a worsening nuclear situation, it's additional support. And on the other hand, a bearish case would be quicker than expected conflict resolutions, sanctions lifted rapidly, and comfortable gas stocks by the next winter. And that's it for the carbon and power markets. I think we can go now to the gas side, if Evariste has resolved all these technical issues.
So we'll start this gas part with a view on stock levels. As you know, stock levels are clearly the main indicator to have a kind of synthesis of supply and demand fundamentals. Stock levels, just look at the graph, they were rather low at the end of last year, mainly because of low Russian supply, low LNG supply, and rising demand. The situation improved from the start of this year. You see clearly that now we are inside the historical range. Why this improvement? Mainly because of higher LNG supply and also below normal demand. But this was the situation before Russia attacks Ukraine on February 2024. Given the size of Russian flows to Europe, representing around 35% of total supply, you can imagine easily why the market was so worried about what could happen on Russian flows. Although they are still flowing to Europe, there is no interruption so far. But if you have to draw some scenarios for the future, of course, Russian supply is one of the main components to take into account. So here you have the 5 scenarios we developed. We will not go in details. We already talked about them during our monthly report. But depending on where you put Russian supply, you have some reaction. You can have a reaction from the LNG market. You can have reaction from demand destruction. And at the end, as a summary, you have the values that we put here. ranging from scenario 1, the most comfortable one, with the stock levels close to maximum, knowing that the maximum capacity is 100. So we are around the maximum capacity in scenario 1. And then gradually you move to scenario 5, where you are very low. You are at just 61 BCM. In the middle, you have a wide range of scenarios. Know that yesterday, the European Commission published its stock requirements for every EU member. And in fact, what they publish, the final proposal is less strict, we can say, than the previous draft, because now they intend for this year to have a stock at around 80% at the November the 1st. This will not change really the scenario we are drawing here. It just means that for this summer we still need to inject a lot so as to have at the start of the winter stock levels at relatively comfortable levels. So here you have a view on the forward curve. What is the message the forward curve is sending us? Again, you have the gas market. When you want to set some levels for the gas market, on the downside you have to look at coal. That's what we did here with the range and the average. And on the upside, you have the most expensive oil substitution possibilities. Here you have the gas oil level. And gas prices, both on Europe and in Asia, GKM prices are in the middle. We also add the prices for the NBP in pence per term. They are close to TTF prices with a premium, because the UK needs also to pay a premium to attract LNG supply. When the market skyrocket on March 7, when the TTF first nearby price rose to 347, in fact, at that time, TTF prices were trading close to gas oil prices or even above. We believe that from that day, there was clear evidence of demand destruction. We saw demand destruction in the industrial sector. You can think about fertilizer or petrochemicals, but also substitutions in favor of oil products, gas oil and liquefied petroleum gases like propane, for instance. And that one was seen in refineries. This helped put month-ahead prices far below the gas oil price. And at the same time, in Asia, we start to see some effort by China or India, for instance, to increase coal production and use. And this help limit their LNG offtakes and help also push prices down. But however, be careful. You see now that the TTF prices are very close to GKM prices, which means that Europe will continue to struggle this summer to attract LNG supply. Let's now move to our forecast for the month-side contract. In general, people tend to oppose technical analysis and fundamental analysis. We believe this is a mistake. For us, technical analysis is just helping to convert fundamentals. Fundamentals are volumes, they are not prices, to convert fundamentals into price levels. And now it depends on what technical analysis you are talking about. It is not just drawing some lines or taking some indicators randomly. The idea is to use technical analysis based on statistics, mathematics, and also the rational behavior of market participants. This is the technical analysis I believe in, and we'll see clearly that you can reconcile the two. Just look at the middle of the chart, starting from Jan 2022 until mid-Feb. At that time, clearly, what we put here as one of the main technical indicators, which is the one-year average, was very close to the coal switching level. Of course, you have this range for coal switching level, but the middle of the range, the average, was clearly around the one-year average. which has a fundamental meaning. The market was telling us prices were above, the trend is bullish, but if I'm comfortable, on average, I should trade around the call switching level. On the opposite, if I am very tight, you see clearly that the 1 year high, which is just taking the 1 year average and using the volatility of the market with a mathematical formula so as to compute this one, you see that the 1 year high was trading around the gas oil level. Again, fundamental meaning, when you are very tight, of course, you need to destroy demand and then to go to prices that will help you destroy demand and switch to oil. This was the situation until the Russian invasion. Of course, with this invasion, prices skyrocket. You see that they broke at that time the technical level, the gas oil level, but again, they come back temporarily before rising again. And in the new rise, you see that the volatility has increased, and then the 1 year high also is increasing. Then if you take all those indicators, the 1 year high, the 1 year average, the 1 year low, and you plot them until the end of the year, just assuming that the slope of the current trend will remain the same, which is a strong assumption. We all know that maybe something will change the picture before the end of the year, but just assume that you have the same slope. You will end with a 1 year high at more than 400. The 1 year average will be a little bit below 200, and the 1 year low will be at around 80. Then what we can do is to put our scenarios, the scenarios you talk about, you can put them here. If you are very comfortable, you are in scenario 1, it means that you can pull prices below the current 1 year low, knowing that if prices continue to drop, the 1 year low will be lower. Maybe we will end at 80 or 70, but the message will be that you are so comfortable that you can break the uptrend and drop below the 1 year low. And then when you are very tight, of course, you are in scenario 5, you are trading again above the gas oil switching level and above the 1 year high. In the middle, you have scenario 2 and 3. We believe that for the time being, the market is hesitating between 2 and 3. But don't forget that yesterday, after President Putin said that now Russia will seek payment in ruble, for instance, the market rebounded, and now we are trading around 120. It means that you can quickly change your mind between the zone 2 and 3 to the zone 4. You are not yet to the level where you can say that the gas oil price is the target, but this is clearly a risk. But overall, what you can keep, the main message from this one is that the trend is bullish, and more important, we believe that the risks are not symmetrical. In the current situation, we believe that there is more upside than downside for prices. So this is for the month side. If you switch now to the year ahead, the calendar contract, same analysis. You have 1 year high, the average, the 1 year low. Again, the main indicator, which is coal. We are not mentioning here gas oil because we believe that for a whole calendar contract, you don't need to pay the gas oil price. You need to pay the coal price, of course, but not the gas oil price. That's why we didn't put the gas oil here. But the message are the same. And here, to simplify, don't forget that the storage situation is a short-term situation. We draw the scenario for this summer, but for next year, you can draw all the scenarios, but roughly they will be the same. You still have the uncertainty on Russian supply. Just look at the table here we put here. But what will be more important for next year is clearly the level of Asia LNG needs. Asia LNG needs, you can say that roughly there are energy needs minus coal supply, domestic gas production, and pipeline imports. Depending on the level of Russian supply and Asia LNG needs, you can see the scenario you can have. We keep the same numbers as on the month ahead, so you can be very comfortable in scenario 1 and very tight in scenario 5. You can put them on the graph again. For the time being, it's difficult to see what scenario will be the one that will prevail. But if I have maybe an advice to give you, is to use this kind of tools. Maybe you can have some insight we don't have about what will happen in Asian coal supply, what will happen in pipeline supply, because China is also taking gas from Russia. If they increase their pipeline gas, it means that they will need less LNG. All those elements can help, in fact, to see how prices could evolve in the coming weeks. But at the end, when the market decide to change its trend, when you have a trend reversal, don't forget that technical analysis and then statistic give you an interesting tool to monitor this trend reversal. It is the average. As long as we are trading above the 1 year average, you can say that the market is bullish and it is looking upward. When you cross this average, it means that you have a trend reversal and then you can see south. So that's it for me. Julien.
On the gas market, so there is a question regarding recent news. Let me show that. So yeah, question: what is the impact of Putin's decision to pay gas only in rubles? So maybe Olivier can also join us for this question. So first, maybe on the motivation behind this decision, and secondly, Évariste, on the impact on the gas market.
On the price impact, okay.
Okay, so I take the easy part, I think. Okay. Well, in my view, I mean, there are several reasons behind Putin's announcement yesterday. First, probably it was to introduce some uncertainty before the announcement of potential new energy sanctions today. You know that there is an important meeting with President Biden visiting the EU. Secondly, that looks obvious. It's to have actually the Russian currency, the ruble, supported by the countries sanctioning Russia. You know that the first consequence of the sanctions was to trigger a plunge in the ruble and force the central bank of Russia to raise its interest rates to 20% to defend the currency. And I think the last reason maybe is linked to supposed currency leakage from company receiving revenues from gas sales. So in a way, it's more a domestic purpose. By imposing a ruble transaction, Putin is trying to prevent this currency leakage. Maybe Évariste? No. For the tough part of the question. Évariste? Well, we can't hear you, Évariste.
Yes, okay, now I can hear you. So, okay, I have to answer on the price impact. You can say the price impact was obvious. So we saw on the graph the sharp rise in TTF prices yesterday. So, of course, because if you have such a decision by Putin, it just means that it will be much more complicated, maybe for European buyers who continue to take Russian gas. So the price impact was obvious. But what I heard also was that maybe Putin will not be able to do that because it is a breach of contract. So it is not a done deal yet, we can say. There is a risk, but it is not a done deal yet because it will be clearly a breach of contract.
Okay, thank you, Evariste. Another question on natural gas. So taking into account the current winter-summer gas spread, will the gas injection take place in Europe?
Yes, interesting question. Of course, if you just look at the commercial point of view, there is no incentive to inject the gas because summer prices are above winter prices. But I believe that this is what Europe is forcing to use to reach a minimum requirement. To say that, of course, maybe it is not interesting commercially, but we need to have at the start of the winter comfortable levels. So we have to force people to inject. Then, as they are injecting with a loss, maybe the next step is to try to to have a kind of subsidy. No, I don't know if it is what the politicians will do, but clearly, yes, this could be an option.
Okay, another question on natural gas markets, especially on the liquidity. Could you say something about how liquidity has evolved? For example, on the TTF over the last couple of weeks.
When you have a market where in a couple of hours you can have movements of 10 to 20 euro per megawatt hour, of course, this will put an exert pressure or a downward pressure on liquidity because people are afraid to take position because investors, but also market makers. And you can also say that such levels, they increase a lot all the margin calls you have to pay to exchanges. Of course, we saw clearly that liquidity dropped just after the surge in prices.
Thank you, Evariste. I have a question maybe for Olivier regarding the US energy market. What about the increase in fossil fuel prices for US end user customers? Is there any risk of midterm election in the US to reduce US LNG exports?
Yeah, I think clearly the most immediate threat concerns gasoline prices, which are extremely high. And you know that the U.S. the Biden administration struggles to make the oil producers to increase their output, and on top of that, you have exports of U.S. products that are increasing towards Europe because, of course, the prices are very high, and you know that there is a diesel shortage in Europe that has been linked also to the reduction in refineries activity due to very high gas prices. So that clearly this is a threat, and we know the importance of U.S. gasoline prices for U.S. elections in general, because due to the lower part of fixed taxes in the price of gasoline in the US. Of course, there is always higher consequence of variation in oil prices for the US consumers. I must say that I'm not very updated. Regarding the situation on the LNG in the US. Maybe I don't know if Evariste has some information about that, but what I can say is that yes, there are big efforts to try to lower the price of gasoline, but so far they have been unsuccessful in the US. Yes.
Yes, but I don't think there is a risk on the LNG export to Europe, particularly in the current situation where Biden knows that Europe is suffering more from this situation than the US, because they are self-sufficient, and in Europe you are not. So I can't imagine the US reducing its LNG export to Europe.
Okay, thank you, Evariste. So I see there are a question in the chat. But we are reaching the end of the session. So we'll answer these questions by email after the session. So thank you all for your attention. Note that the next webinar session will take place in June. And so just before I close the session, I would just like you to answer a very short satisfaction survey, please. This is really important for us to get your feedback and improve as much as possible our service session after session. So thank you all to take 30 seconds to answer that. We hope you enjoyed the session. And maybe Evariste, I see you are still there. Maybe one last question regarding natural gas before we close the session. What could be the role of Spain from the LNG side? Probably we know that Spain has a huge LNG import infrastructure. Can Spain help Europe to balance if we have less Russian gas in the coming months?
I'm not sure Spain will be able to help the owners, because the question is not on the regasification capacity. It is much more on the liquefaction capacity. Will we have enough LNG worldwide to send huge higher volumes to Europe? So it's not the question of the regasification capacity, because Spain has a lot, but mainly the lack of liquefaction capacity. So on this situation, I think that Europe, all European countries are the same, and you see it in the spread. The spread narrow quite significantly between the main markets.
All right. Thank you, Evariste. I will end the voting session. Thank you all for those who responded. So it's time to close the session. I hope you enjoyed it. So see you soon on our Enerscan platform. Goodbye.